Yeah, just my take on things. My answer to number 2. Guided discovery, identifying, challenging your beliefs, reframing your mind, negative thoughts release. Those cognitive distortions decrease until they cease. Guided discovery, identifying, challenging your beliefs.
All right, I think we're recording. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Here we are, another episode of Peplau's Ghost. Very fortunate to be joined by the whole crew is here today. Dr. Sean Convoy, Dr. Kate Molino, and Dr. Melissa Chapman-Hayes. We're all here again to finish out 2025. Depending on when you're listening to this, maybe you're listening to it in 2026, maybe you're listening to it in 2027, who knows? But this is our last episode here for 2025. So I always think, end of year stuff, very reflective, kind of how the year was. And I'm really reflective on this podcast and where we've been and looking forward to where we're going. We have a lot of different guests lined up here for 2026. And we were just talking before we started recording that we have podcasts people listed pretty much close to half the year set up. So if you have somebody you're listening and you're like, hey, I want to be on this podcast, I would love to hear from you. Would love to kind of consider getting you on the podcast, scheduling you to get that going. So I'm assuming if you're listening to this podcast, this is kind of your jam and we'd like to hear from you. I mean, I think that's the thing that excites me about this podcast is how it can connect us and, get like-minded people together and just kind of have a friendly chat on Friday. So, but what I also told us that we kind of do is just maybe review our statistics. We were talking to Dr. Melissa Chapman last week about it. Every person's a day at a point. So that's kind of what we're going to do. Maybe talk a little bit about these episodes and what we have. And so I'm going to start off with just kind of having everybody unmute and say, how many downloads do you think our podcast has gotten in the time that we've been alive and well? What are some guesses?
I played The Price is Right before, so I'm going to say 2.
Well played, sir. Well played. That's nice. What do other people think?
I have no idea. I mean, we did a lot of episodes in the past year.
Yeah.
100? I don't know.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go with 1,000.
Oh, I think everybody's going to be very pleasantly surprised. So the second thing, I'll hit that number of downloads that we've hit. How many episodes do we think we've had? What episode are we sitting on? Would you say?
Mid-30s.
What does it feel like? Yeah. Yep. 36. This is, I think, 36 or 37. I could be wrong, but we're right in there. Yeah. But number of downloads, you guys are wildly underestimating. So I guess, Kate, you are the winner. 3,581. Total all-time pod. I know, right? Yes. Yeah. Excellent. Which episodes stand out in your mind as kind of being maybe the ones that I've got the top 5 listed here, but what do you think what episodes kind of stand out for you? Or want to share any thoughts on which episodes really kind of stick in your head?
The 2 where we interviewed Kate and Melissa probably stand out for me.
That's great. Yeah.
Andrew Penn stands out for me.
Yeah. He's number 3 on the list. So, Yep.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said. And also Howard Butcher's episode.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Unfortunately, Melissa's just came out, so she has not gathered the number of views to get in the top 5. I'm sorry. And I don't see Kate here either, I'm sorry to say. But maybe that's one of our goals is to start maybe spreading the word over this holiday break, start pumping it in our social medias and things. But I am a little surprised. I need to go back and re-listen to this episode. Our number 1 downloaded episode is with Dr. Terry Dilks. When Pills Aren't Enough, a candid conversation with Dr. Dilks on psychotherapy's vital role in mental health care. 260 downloads. So
very cool.
Go Dr. Dilks. Yeah. Second one is actually Dr. Brooke Finley.
Yeah.
And her psychoanalysis, and she's got a whole fellowship. She's a shining star. So 212 downloads to date. And then it's Andrew Penn, like you mentioned, Melissa, and talking about the psychedelic therapies, and 209 downloads with her. And then there's Cheryl Puntil from Canada. She shared kind of some of her works and psychodynamic approaches and her research. And then the last one, anyone want to guess what's number 5? It's again kind of the last time we've had like just the 4 of us on here. When was that? Episode 1.
Okay.
The magic of evidence-based woohoo. Yeah. I still love that. That's so great. Awesome. So, all right. So thank you so much. And again, most of us are downloading us through the Apple podcast. So maybe we need to, I don't know how we kind of boost that up as far as looking at, getting Spotify a little more. And obviously the most prominent is the United States as well. Although we have a fairly good amount, 14% in Europe. Oceania, which is kind of Australia and in that area, is about 6%. Africa is about, unfortunately, just one download. So, and then Asia's got about 1% as well. So yeah, some good stuff. So again, thank you for listening. Appreciate your patronage, I guess, a little bit. I'm still the only podcast that's ad-free. Probably there's a bunch that are ad-free, but the only one that we do that is ad-free. And we look forward to kind of giving you more episodes here in 2026. So like we mentioned last time too, any more thoughts on our past episodes? Anything kind of stand out?
I'm surprised that we don't have much activity from Canada, and I personally blame Kate, and I encourage her when she gets home to kind of make some changes as it relates to that.
Thank you, Sean. I take full responsibility. Absolutely.
One person in the whole country. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, no, great. That's what we do here. Hold each other accountable. So, all right. So that's what we're doing today. We're getting into talking to Dr. Sean Convoy. He's kind of one of our last, actually myself, I'm the last one. So we were just talking about when we would kind of turn the microphones on me here for this, not for this episode, but in the future episodes. So trying to find a time and space that we can do that as well. But so this was talking about Dr. Sean Convoy. So yeah, I think, we've kind of talked a little bit about, kind of past and things like that. But, I'm really kind of want to just, maybe if you could just kind of expand a little more on, how'd you get here? Let's talk about that. This is, you're an esteemed and, national figure in psych mental health nursing and at a prestigious university. I'm going to assume you didn't start that prestigious. So maybe where do you want to start? Let's go back as far as you want.
Yeah, it's interesting. I
draw that line. Sorry.
I first started working in mental health field in 1986. In 1986, I matriculated into my first college experience. I was at then Elon College, just a little bit west of me here in North Carolina. Coincidentally, it's where I met my wife. But that experience, I got degrees in psychology and English, and I tried to apply directly to UNC Chapel Hill's clinical psychology program. Made it through 3 interviews. And on the 4th interview, they said, go get some life experience. You're not ready yet. So I was turned down. And at that time, I was working in a group home in Burlington, North Carolina. And I was probably paying off Visa with MasterCard, just trying to survive at that time. And I remember talking with a friend of mine who said, come into the military, you can actually work in mental health and you get this experience and people can't sue you. So they typically let you do more than you would otherwise be able to do without a license. So I enlisted in the Navy. I became a hospital corpsman and then specifically a psychiatric technician. And then I had probably the most amazing experience of my career right around early 1990s, where I was placed on an inpatient psychiatric unit at a naval hospital on the Eastern Coast. And I had this opportunity for 2.5 years to sit on a crisis intervention unit where I had a chance to look at what physicians did, what psychologists did, what chaplains did, what nurses did, and what advanced practice nurses did. Now, at this time, there weren't many psychiatric nurse practitioners around, so the discourse of advanced practice nursing was dominated by clinical nurse specialists. So I was trained by some absolute giants in psychiatric nursing. And my first skill set, because of that trajectory, was psychotherapy. At that time, in the inpatient units, we were actually doing therapy and psychoeducation as opposed to just keeping people safe, right? So from my perspective, I had this amazing experience to get informed consent about what every profession did. And what I noticed is that physicians were typically on the unit for about 30 to 45 minutes a day. Psychologists were on the unit, social workers were on the unit for about an hour to 2 a day, but the nurses never left. And for me, my vantage point is I thought, you know what? I just want to spend time with patients. So I got informed consent. And then from there, the military took good care of me. They sent me back to school for a nursing degree. They sent me back to school for my advanced practice nursing degree, and then they sent me back to school for my doctorate. And then I retired in 2014. And then after 2014, I jumped into an academic experience at Virginia Commonwealth University, and then I transferred over to Duke.
Awesome, Sean. Thank you. I appreciate that kind of history. And I would say too, it's always reminded me too that past degree of English, because very much I want to give credit to you in coming up with the title for this podcast, Peplau's Ghost, which I think is just brilliant. Would have taken me 100 years to kind of come up with anything close to that. So maybe let's ask, I've got a couple of questions, but I don't want to dominate because I know Kate and Melissa, you have your own questions here too. But let me ask this, how does that English degree kind of feed what you're doing currently or just kind of throughout your career? And you could maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I tell you, I also, I studied Latin, so I think that helped language for me develop as a child growing up when I was going through high school. And I also think that the English degree helped me in that I realized that so often I communicate with patients via metaphor and analogy, and being the ability to kind of translate complex ideas to something that's accessible to them. Another thing that I think about is when I work with patients, sometimes they don't really need much of us other than to be their biographer. So in many regards, I look at it from a literary perspective. I obviously don't write books or stories about them, but quite frankly, in my clinical documentation, for me, the writing of the note, like the idea now that AI is actually building your notes for you is kind of anathema in my mind. Because for me, part of the ability to crystallize the case comes by my ability to kind of sit down in front of a computer and actually write the HPI. So I think in many regards, English has allowed me just to more effectively communicate and capture the unique experiences of our patients.
Yeah, that's well said. I totally resonate with that idea that, documenting, as I've kind of gone through my career, documentation, been the bane of my existence in some ways, but also it has, as I've gotten to this point now, is just kind of, it's a way to solidify everything just happened in that appointment and helps me kind of, kind of solidify that. So I know I can recall some of it when we come back to next time, but it does help me kind of gather my thoughts. So I love that. So thanks. Appreciate that, Sean.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to piggyback on that a little because, Sean, you made me think of something that I have sort of observed over my career in psych mental health, which is that, certainly this doesn't apply to everyone, but there is a really significant portion of psych mental health nurses who are or were artists in a previous life or still are artists. Like it attracts a very sort of creative group of people. And so like I'm also just curious sort of like, how do you see the role of like creativity or art in the work that we do?
I love the question. I'm a writer. That's kind of one of my identities. And when I'm done with all this, I'm going to go back to writing full time. And one thing that I've really enjoyed doing over the years is creating nursing narratives. A lot of times when we think about how we conceptualize and train the next generation of nurses and advanced practice nurses, we think about, what can you put in a PowerPoint or what about a research article? I think we undervalue the role of a nursing narrative that kind of tells a story. And sometimes I think those stories are more helpful to a developing nurse or advanced practice nurse than an evidence-based article about whatever, right? So from my perspective, I think that kind of writing, that kind of building and connecting the art and the science of our profession is the secret sauce. And for me, some of my students from the past who are hearing this right now will roll their eyes because I forced them, whether they like it or not, to actually create a nursing narrative during their enrollment in the program, just to give them an experience of what that's like. Because I think not only can it be illustrative for future students, but it also is cathartic for the nurse.
So I'm curious always why people pursue more advanced degrees. And so why pursue all the way up to your doctorate? Was it, and it could be a few things. Was it a patient experience or a personal goal and achievement, or did you want like just deeper knowledge?
It's a great question. I think, I would love to be able to say that, I always knew this is exactly the trajectory I wanted to take. But I think the more honest, pragmatic answer is that I was working in a system that was very hierarchical in its orientation in the military. And if you didn't check X or Y block in the military, you wouldn't be able to stay or promote. So in many regards, I progressed along the path of least resistance. I became a registered nurse, and then I did what I needed to do to create the next opportunity, because a lot of the education is built into the rank progression for the military. So I'd love to say that, yes, it was all altruistic in orientation, but that would be BS. Quite frankly, it was because that's what the military expected of me. That being said, where I'm at now, my God, I wouldn't have changed it for anything. I've had so many amazing experiences. I had so many amazing teachers that I've had over the years. So the motivations might not have been really altruistic, but the results that I'm going to give to it are going to turn into health.
I always appreciate your honesty and willingness to just say what actually happened.
It was all about money, right, Sean? Just tell us. It's
we
know
I made
that.
a poor choice if that's the case. I'll tell you that, particularly in academia, right?
Yeah, we need to talk about that.
We all take a significant pay cut coming into academia. We either have to be mentally ill or intrinsically motivated to do the right thing, right?
Absolutely. No, well said. One of the things that I would love to hear from you, to really kind of maybe be a little vulnerable here, because I'm always attracted by this whenever I have authors that, share their stories of their mistakes, the things that they didn't do quite right, or they didn't go far enough, or they missed something. And again, usually those stories are very well intertwined into how they learn from that, they grow from that, right? I think, but those are always attracted to me because I'm always reflecting on the idea that I don't have to be perfect, and thank God I don't have to be perfect. So that's why I'm always drawn to those kind of things. So I would love to kind of hear from you, maybe a story or two that kind of, you reflect on and you say, oof, I wish I could have that back, but it has made me the person who I am today.
Absolutely. I've got a couple right off the top of my head that I will never forget. I remember I'll pause a little bit just to make sure I'm doing my best to de-identify information. But I remember working at this time as a psychiatric nurse, not an advanced practice psychiatric nurse, but a psychiatric nurse at a military hospital somewhere along the coast. And I remember encountering one patient who this time was a Marine, and the Marine was admitted to our unit on a weekend with an alcohol-infused suicidal gesture. And in situations like this is back in the mid-1990s, actually late 1990s. This individual got a diagnosis of an adjustment disorder and probably was kept in the hospital about 4 or 5 days and given a routine referral for substance treatment. He was discharged, didn't think about him again. 2 weeks later, he was admitted again over a weekend, and this time he had a significantly increased suicide attempt where he swallowed probably a few grams of Tylenol, and his BAL was twice the normal limit. So I remember after that experience, they kept him for about 2 weeks. They upgraded the diagnosis to major depressive disorder and then ruled in, and at that time, an alcohol abuse diagnosis, because the DSM had that framing back in that time. And then they put him on a period of limited duty to kind of structure up his ability to get cured. And then I remember a month later, he came back in and he had a more severe attempt where he had cut himself vertically along his wrists and a cube and had a profound, like 2.5 times the normal legal limit of alcohol. We kept him in the hospital for probably a month and a half after that. And then I remember the weekend that they eventually made the decision to discharge him, because they were going to discharge him and he was going to be military separated a few days later because he was getting a medical board. And I remember working with the clinical psychologist who's no longer with us. He was a great man. And I remember talking with him because he was struggling. He'd worked with this patient since day one. And he says, I don't think we've given this patient what he needs, and I'm afraid this is the last time I'm going to see him. And this is kind of where the story gets a little dark. This patient got discharged on a Friday. It was in the fall, winter months. He went back to his command, checked the paperwork out, and then got in his car and drove down about 50 miles south of where we were at to a resort town in the winter, nobody there. Went over to Lowe's, grabbed 2 containers of Quikrete, and then brought them back to his car, spent the night in the hotel around, as it's estimated by the police, about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, he went to the pool in the backyard where there was nobody else watching, filled up, put his feet in the container of quick grieving, filled them up with water, and waited till sunrise to jump into the deep part of the pool. So, and he completed suicide. They did not find him for probably a day and a half until that happened. And, it came back to us, and they actually had an M&M kind of looking at the entire case from stem to stern. And the message that I got from that was, and this might sound somewhat fatalistic, is that, you know what? Sometimes the disease wins. And you can do everything you can, and it just doesn't work. So the message I got here is that, I have to remind myself that I only have so much control in these situations. And my job isn't to fix patients. It's to create every opportunity to deliver my skills to help them. But sometimes I think our friends in oncology do a better job of accepting a patient's death. I think our friends in the ER and the OR do a better job than psychiatry of accepting a patient's death when it happens. So I think, kind of building off your question, Dan, the thing that I learned is that I can do everything right, whatever the hell right is, and still it might not work out.
Man, thanks, Sean. That was powerful. I appreciate that. It always kind of harkens back to, I tell students all the time, it's not a matter of if, but when. It's, we do. And I agree. I think, it makes me think of a psychiatrist we have in our community who unfortunately had a patient who completed suicide on a psychiatric unit. And the approach and then the talk within the community behind closed doors and things were really focused on the psychiatrists and providing poor care and things like that. But yeah, we don't always fix everybody. So yeah. Thank you.
On the other side, I have a positive story I can also share with you all to kind of lighten up the mood a bit here. Similarly, I was working on an inpatient unit, and I remember as a psych nurse working a weekend. I was going to be working 3 12s in a row, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And it was a night shift at that time. So I came in Friday evening, and these are all Marines, and these Marines work out whether they're in the hospital or not. And we had a washing machine and a dryer on the inpatient unit. And of course, that evening, the washing machine broke. So I was faced with the prospects of having to navigate smelly Marines for a 3-day weekend, right? So I made a very pragmatic decision. I said, listen, I want you to put, all of your skivvies and all of your PT gear, your socks and underwear in one container and your uniforms in the other one. And when I come home Saturday morning, I'll wash your stuff. And when I come home Sunday morning, I'll wash your stuff and I'll bring everything back. I didn't do this for praise or anything like that. And quite frankly, I didn't even think about it again. And then 4 years later it happens. And at that time, I left the command that I was at, and I was at another duty station, and I'd actually been overseas to the Middle East and stuff like that. And somewhere along the way, I got a letter from somebody, and it followed me to Kuwait and to Iraq, and then it followed me back to Portsmouth and eventually got to Camp Lejeune. So it was postmarked everywhere. So it took probably 2 years to get to me. And I remember the letter was from a prior patient. And this patient had a significant substance use disorder. This young man was having a hard time with opiates. It got him into trouble. He was going to be kicked out of the military with what's called a bad conduct discharge, which is kind of the worst case scenario. It really affects your ability to have a job when you get out. And he wrote this letter to me. He said, listen, I wanted to let you know that I am working my 12 steps. And one of the things that I have to acknowledge in my 12 steps of recovery is to recognize where my low point was. And you're connected to my low point. And he said, when I finally got clean, I started working the program, I realized that having a military officer watch my dirty under was my all-time low point. And then he said, I want you to know that, I'm really grateful for that kindness that you gave us, because now I want you to know that I'm just a little bit away from graduating with my graduate degree, where I'm going to be a substance use counselor. And I have been sober X number. And this was 2 years to the future. So the message I want to send to you all is that, if everything you do matters, it's also possible that everything you don't do matters. And the littlest things that you do, it's not having some grand psychodynamic interpretation. It's not reframing a core belief system. It's not even navigating an index trauma with CPT. Sometimes just the simplest kindness can totally transform a patient's life, whether you realize it or not. And that's why I always say, from a nursing perspective, a lot of times we have students saying in graduate programs, I don't know enough to be a psychotherapist. All due respect, bullshit. You do, because you're a nurse, right? You have those skills. The idea of Peplau's interpersonal relationships model was trained in you in your pre-licensure program. So give yourself more credit than you actually, you can do these things. And, I didn't do that one day thinking, hey, one day this patient is going to totally change his world just because I washed his dirty underwear. So.
That's awesome. Another one. That's great. Such a great story. And again, thank you for maybe changing the vibe, as the kids say. But that story too speaks to me as well of just kind of trusting who you are. Because as I've known you, Sean, that's something you would do day in and day out. I mean, that's just who you are. And I think sometimes we just need to trust that's, just be a real authentic person to the people that we work with. And yeah, who knows what happens? Good things, really. I've just got one more question. And again, you mentioned Peplau. So that's, actually the direction I was going to go in, obviously her theory of interpersonal connections and things. So maybe let's kind of wrap it up that way. So thinking of an episode, I mean, the question is basically think of an episode or think of something that happened in which your interaction with the person, again, just like you said, it didn't have to be something fancy, theoretical, framework and workbook or something. What was the time in which you just interacted with someone that was the intervention and that had the positive outcome, just being with that person, just interacting with them on a very kind of personal or human nature?
With a patient you're talking about?
Yeah, you can go off books too, and if you want to think personally, but yeah, I guess I was thinking kind of more your professional life, but
yeah, I'll tell you, I'll give you a clinical example and maybe a professional example I can come up with in between. The clinical example, I remember I was in the Middle East in 2008. At that time, I was deployed supporting, interestingly enough, even though I was a Navy guy, an Army unit, the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment. And at that time, I was on a base called Fob Merez, which is in Mosul in the northern portion of Iraq. And at that time, I was pretty much the only mental health asset, me and 2 fantastic Army psychiatric technicians and 1 great therapy dog called Sergeant First Class Fudge. And I remember at that time, pretty much anything that was mental health related was coming to me. And we had a great number of people that are referred to as third country nationals. I don't like the term, but these were individuals that were contracted by any number of different agencies to come and support services. Sometimes they cut hair. Sometimes they worked in the food services area to kind of augment the military service members running the base. And I remember this is a great example of how Western's perspective of mental health is a little bit different than other areas. Not better or worse, just different. And I remember that there was one young lady who I did not understand a word of what she said because she was Iraqi and she spoke her language. And what I understood when they dropped her to my doorstep at 2:00 in the morning is that they said through the translator, she's crazy. And I thought to myself, okay, well, let me listen to the story. And I used the translator. And what happened was she wasn't crazy. Her mom died. And she was actively grieving. This was not mental illness. She was just actively grieving. And all I had to do was to listen via the translator and give her a space to communicate. And within 2 or 3 hours, she was able to reconstitute. But it's an example of how sometimes we have the tendency to over-pathologize. I'll give you another example. I spent some time in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba at the beginning of after September 11th when they were bringing a bunch of detainees down. And I was part of a special psychiatric rapid intervention team or a sprint team. And their job was to provide mental health support. And that's what I was doing. And I was consulted to the Fleet Hospital there. They had a number of individuals from Afghanistan who, during the Afghan-Iran war, had a number of different orthopedic injuries. And the American healthcare system was actually doing wound backs and surgical pinnings to fix these old wounds. And there was one individual that they called me on. They said, this patient is crazy. And I went, okay. So I grabbed the interpreter again and I said, explain to me what you're seeing that makes you think he's crazy, in charge nurse. And they said, the patient is eating the wool off of his blanket. And I thought, okay. So I asked the interpreter to come with me, and we walked up there, and I said to the interpreter, I said, do not take any license. Just ask this simple question. Why are you eating the blanket? And the interpreter asked the question. The patient kind of tilted his head and said a brief statement. And the interpreter started to laugh. And I said, what did he say? He said, there are little crumbs of food, and he never knows when he's going to be fed again. So he's not crazy. He's just hungry. Right? How often do we have this tendency to, absolutely pathologize things? Back to Dan's question. For me, it's the simple questions and creating space for people to give other answers that I think is kind of the secret sauce to all this.
That's awesome. Yeah. I remember a psychologist that I used to work with, kind of goes along this line too, but he used to work for the Red Cross. And I remember him telling a story that when he got deployed, the people were, kind of pointing him, this is where you need to go, this is where you need to go. And he identified himself, as a psychologist. And he said, okay, go over by the water cooler. And he thought that was kind of weird, like the water cooler, no. And I think he was with a partner, and his partner was kind of really bent out of shape. Like, no, I need an office, I need my own, room and space and things like that. And the psychologist I work with was like, that person was so wrong, because actually the water cooler was a perfect place. That's where everybody came, got some water, decompressed a little bit, talked about what was going on, and they were able just kind of to debrief with them a little bit and just kind of, hang out with them and just say, hey, it's going to be okay, and just kind of, that kind of brief intervention of just kind of being with them and connecting with them really was powerful. And so it's that kind of story is connected with me too. It's just kind of holding on. Don't have to get super fancy, and awesome. This is great. Yeah. Kate and Melissa, you got anything else? We're getting close on time, but
Honestly, I have so many other questions, so I don't. Maybe we can do another episode.
Part 2. Yeah, there we go. We always mention that. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Yeah.
I would just say, absolutely. You have such amazing experience, Sean. I would love to hear more.
Thanks. I'll tell you what, thinking about our listenership, the only difference between the people you see or you're hearing, I should say, in this podcast and yourself, if you have interest in becoming an advanced practice nurse, is time and effort. Each and every one of us have, I like to think that one of the really valuable things about advanced practice nurses is that we're all different, right? And that difference actually kind of informs this ever-evolving genotype of nurse practitioners in psychiatry. So, we don't want you all doing the exact same thing. We want there to be tremendous diversity in your interests. Some of you psychotherapeutically might align more with DBT or CBT or psychoanalytic therapy. The messaging here from this community is that there's no one form of therapy that's better than the other. And quite frankly, the variability of different skills within our community is what kind of makes us strong. And the reason why all 4 of us are spending our time doing this kind of work with you all and giving this podcast some energy is because we're genuinely concerned that some of the drivers within healthcare are going to kind of limit our role function. And quite frankly, we do believe that Peplau would be rolling in her grave if she saw how we are starting to, down-regulate our use of psychotherapy, and then also down-regulate in certain programs the training of psychotherapy and advanced practice nursing programs. So the reason why we're putting so much effort into it is to keep this alive, because quite frankly, of all the time I've spent doing this kind of work, a patient has never said, Dr. Convoy, when you changed my effector from 37.5 to 75, it changed my life. All right. Nobody ever said, oh my God, thank you for finding my vitamin D deficiency. More often than not, they say, thank you for actually listening. Thank you for authentically being there. That's the stuff that makes all the difference in this profession. The meds, they serve a purpose for specific subpopulations in particular, but don't let this go.
Wow, I don't even know if yeah, I know, right? Yeah, that's Sean puts a nice little period on that podcast episode. Thank you, sir. That was amazing and agree. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing more people get interested in this podcast. That's why we've got, episodes lined up here for the at least foreseeable future. So we'll look forward to seeing everybody. Hopefully everybody's gotten a little something out of that. Thank you to Dr. Sean Convoy for bearing his soul a little bit, and appreciate that from Dr. Melissa Chapman Hayes' previous episode too. So again, everyone have a wonderful holiday season here in 2025, and we really look forward to getting back here and giving you some more episodes here in 26. All right, take care.
Too much seasoning. They feel it, therefore it's true. Work hard until those thoughts are finally leaving, so you can be you. They feel it, therefore it's true. Work hard until those thoughts are finally leaving, so you can be you. Guided discovery. Identifying, challenging your beliefs. Reframing your mind, negative thoughts release. Let it go. These cognitive distortions decrease until they cease. Yeah, guided discovery. Identifying, challenging your beliefs. Reframing your mind, negative thoughts release. Let it go. These cognitive distortions decrease until they cease.